the doll that came to life. They say some things in this world just can't be explained, no matter how hard you try to understand them. And in the small town of Millwood, nestled deep in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a story passed down through generations. A tale that the older folks whisper around campfires and tell their children before bed, hoping they'll fall asleep before the shadows take on a life of their own. It begins with a little girl named Lily May, who grew up in a humble, weather-beaten farmhouse on the outskirts of town. It was a house so old it seemed to have a heartbeat of its own, creaking and groaning with each gust of wind. Her family wasn't wealthy by any means, but they had a strong sense of love and tradition. The walls were lined with old quilts, the smell of fresh-baked bread filled the air, and the fireplace was always crackling, even in the hottest months. But one thing that always stood out in Lily May's childhood home was a peculiar doll. The doll was old, much older than Lily herself. Her mother, Mary, had kept it tucked away in a chest in the attic for as long as Lily could remember. It was a raggedy thing, made of burlap with button eyes and a patched-up dress that had seen better days. But something about the doll always unsettled Lily, like it was watching her, judging her, even when it was sitting still. As the story goes, the doll had been passed down through generations of women in Mary's family, each of them given the doll as a child. It was said to be a family heirloom, though no one could remember who had originally made it. Some whispered that it had been created by a long-lost relative, a woman who dabbled in strange arts and practices, an artist with a passion for creating things that could move, things that could think for themselves. But no one in the town dared to ask Mary too many questions about its origins. Lily May, like many children, was curious. She wanted to play with the doll, to understand why it sat so still in the attic, locked away from the world. But every time she asked her mother if she could bring it down, Mary would grow pale and quietly refuse, warning her that the doll had a history, one that should not be disturbed. One rainy evening, when Lily was 9 years old, her curiosity got the best of her. Her mother had gone into town, leaving Lily alone in the house. The storm raged outside and the wind howled through the trees, shaking the windows. Lily stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up at the attic door. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. With a mix of excitement and dread, Lily crept up the narrow staircase to the attic. The wooden steps creaked under her weight, and the air grew colder as she neared the door. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. But her curiosity won out. She turned the handle and stepped inside. The attic was dark, save for a few beams of light that managed to break through the cracks in the wooden slats. Dust hung in the air like mist, and the scent of old books and forgotten memories filled her lungs. At the far end of the attic, beneath a faded quilt, the doll lay in a wooden chest, just as it had always been. But now, with her mother's absence, it felt different, more alive somehow. Lily May reached for the chest, her fingers trembling as she lifted the lid. There it was, the doll, its button eyes staring up at her. The last time she had seen it, it had been neatly arranged, its limbs stiff and its head slightly tilted as though it were sleeping. But now it was different. The doll's hands were curled into tiny, sharp claws, and its head was turned unnaturally to one side, its eyes wide and staring straight ahead. A chill ran down Lily's spine, but she ignored it. She wanted to believe that it was just the storm making her nervous, the shadows playing tricks on her eyes. She reached for the doll, her hands trembling, and picked it up. The moment she did, a strange warmth spread through her fingers as if the doll were alive. Lily stared at it, captivated by its twisted little face. There was something both comforting and terrifying about the way it looked back at her, its eyes somehow full of longing. She set the doll down on the floor, and for the first time in years she dared to speak to it. "Why are you so still?" she whispered. "Why won't you play with me?" But the doll didn't answer, of course. It remained silent, unmoving, just as it always had. Lily sat down beside it, staring into its black button eyes. The wind howled outside, and the storm seemed to grow louder, as if the world itself were reacting to the doll. She reached out to touch it again, but this time, before her fingers made contact, something strange happened. The air around the doll seemed to shimmer, as though the very fabric of reality had bent. Lily gasped, her hand jerking back. For a moment, everything was still. Then, in the blink of an eye, the doll's head turned. Lily's heart stopped. She blinked, thinking her mind was playing tricks on her, but the doll's head had indeed moved, its lifeless eyes now locked onto her with a gaze that chilled her to the core. A low whisper filled the air, a voice that wasn't hers, that wasn't anyone's. "Leave, now." Lily stumbled back, her breath quick and shallow. The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating, the voice full of ancient power. She scrambled to her feet, her mind spinning. The storm outside grew louder, the wind roaring as if the entire house was alive, angry, aware of her trespass. The attic door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. She ran for the stairs, her heart racing, her breath ragged as she bolted down the steps. The house seemed to tremble as if it were alive and awake, watching her, angry at the intrusion. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she could hear the faintest sound coming from upstairs, a soft, scraping noise as if something was dragging itself across the floor. Lily turned, running out of the house and into the storm. She didn't stop until she reached the safety of her neighbor's house, the warm light spilling out into the night. Her mother returned later that evening, but Lily never spoke of what she'd seen. Not then. Not ever. It wasn't until years later, when Mary passed away, that Lily May found the courage to open the attic door once more. And what she found there, what she caught on camera, would shake the very foundations of Millwood. But that's a story for another time. Years had passed since that night in the attic. Lily May had grown into a young woman, leaving the small town of Millwood behind in search of a new life in the bustling city. She found solace in the hum of city life, the distance from her childhood home providing a sense of escape from the dark memories that clung to her like shadows. But even the distance couldn't free her from the haunting images of the doll and the whisper she had heard in the attic. Still, she tried to forget. That was until the phone call came. It was late, the city streets buzzing below her apartment window when the ring of her old, forgotten landline cut through the silence. The voice on the other end was familiar but shaken. Her old friend, Sarah, who still lived in Millwood. Her voice was trembling, a mix of fear and confusion. "Lily May, I need you to come home. You need to see something," Sarah's voice cracked, her words stumbling over themselves. "It's the doll, Lily. It's back."
Lily felt her heart drop into her stomach. Her blood ran cold. The doll, that doll, had somehow returned. She thought the memory of it had been buried long ago, tucked away with the rest of her childhood nightmares. I don't understand," Lily said, her voice shaking. "How could it be back? I thought it was gone. That night I thought." "I don't know," Sarah interrupted. "But it's here, Lily. And it's moving. Just like you said it would." Lily felt a weight settle on her chest, heavy with dread. The curse that had haunted her family's attic was real. She couldn't deny it any longer. "I'm coming home," Lily said, her voice hardening with determination. She didn't know how she was going to handle it, but she knew she had to face the past, once and for all. The drive back to Millwood felt like an eternity. The weather seemed to mirror Lily's unease, dark clouds hanging low in the sky, a constant drizzle of rain pelting the windshield. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for her. When Lily arrived at the old farmhouse, the place seemed even more dilapidated than it had been when she left. The porch creaked under her weight, the paint chipped and fading, the house looking like it might collapse under the weight of its own secrets. Inside, the air was thick with dust, the rooms unchanged, as if time had not dared to move within the walls of the house. Sarah was waiting for her by the door, her face pale, eyes wide with fear. "You have to see this," Sarah whispered, leading Lily upstairs to the attic. The door creaked open, just as it had so many years ago. The scent of old wood and mildew filled the air. And there, in the same spot where it had been all those years ago, was the doll. But something was different. It wasn't just the doll's faded dress or the dull, lifeless buttons for eyes. It was its position. The doll's head was tilted slightly forward, its limbs outstretched as if it were waiting for someone to pick it up. And there, in the dim light, Lily swore she saw a faint glimmer of movement. "It moved," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw it myself. And the camera." She gestured to the corner of the room, where a dusty old camera sat on a tripod. "I set it up, just in case. You won't believe what it recorded." Lily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She didn't want to look, didn't want to believe that the curse had returned, but she knew she had to. She turned her gaze to the camera and felt her stomach churn as she pushed the button to play the footage. At first, the footage was nothing more than the doll sitting in the middle of the room, its eyes staring straight ahead. But then, something happened. The doll's head shifted ever so slightly, its eyes glinting in the light as though it were coming alive. The camera's focus adjusted, and in the footage, Lily could see the doll's limbs moving. Its arms twitched, its head tilted to one side, then the other, as if it were stretching after a long sleep. The camera's lens caught every unsettling movement, every second of the nightmare unfolding before them. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she was seeing. The doll's movements weren't just random, they were deliberate, calculated. And as it slowly, unnaturally stood up, its head turned to face the camera. And then a voice. A whisper, so soft it almost couldn't be heard over the sound of Lily's pounding heart. "Come closer." Lily felt a cold sweat break out across her skin. The voice was unmistakable. It was the same whisper she had heard all those years ago, the same chilling words that had sent her running from the attic in fear. "Lily," Sarah's voice broke through the tension. I tried to stop it. I tried to burn the doll, to get rid of it. But every time I touched it, I felt this presence. It was like it was alive. And it wouldn't let me." Lily's eyes locked onto the doll and the camera's footage. The movements were growing more frantic, the doll's arms jerking and twisting in unnatural ways. It was no longer just a doll. It was something far worse. "I don't know what it wants," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "But I know it's not going to stop." Lily stood frozen, in place. She remembered the stories her mother had told her as a child, whispers of curses, of dark magic, and of the women in their family who had been marked by it. The doll wasn't just a toy. It was a vessel, a conduit for something far more ancient, far more malevolent. And now, it had found its way back to her. "I have to end this," Lily said, her voice steady, though her insides were churning with fear. "Once and for all." But as she moved toward the doll, the temperature in the attic dropped, the air growing thick with an unnatural cold. The walls seemed to close in, the house groaning as if in protest. She could feel the presence growing stronger, a force that seemed to push against her, urging her to turn back. But she couldn't. She wouldn't. She reached out to grab the doll, and as her fingers brushed against the cold fabric, a violent flash of light erupted in front of her. The doll jerked violently, its head spinning 180 degrees. Lily screamed as her vision blurred, the world spinning out of control. "Leave!" The voice was louder now, more forceful, as if it were coming from inside her own mind. Lily stumbled back, her heart hammering in her chest. The attic door slammed shut with a deafening crash. And then, everything went dark. The doll's final whisper. Lily's eyes snapped open. The darkness around her was suffocating, thick like velvet, but she wasn't sure whether she had passed out or if time itself had simply stopped. Her ears rang with an eerie silence, as if the house had swallowed all sound. The only thing she could feel was the cold, the same biting chill that had descended upon her the moment she touched the doll. She blinked, trying to clear the fog from her mind. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, but she wasn't sure if it was fear or the echo of something else, something far older. Slowly, she lifted her hand, and her fingers brushed against something cold, hard. It was the doll. The same doll that had haunted her childhood, that had moved on its own, that had whispered her name. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized she was lying on the floor, the doll beside her, its eyes staring up at her, wide and unblinking. A shiver ran down her spine as she slowly sat up, feeling as if every inch of her body had been pressed down by some unseen weight. "Sarah?" Lily whispered, her voice hoarse. She turned her head, her eyes scanning the room. The attic was as dark and still as before, but there was no sign of her friend. The sudden silence in the room felt unnatural. She stood shakily to her feet, the doll's vacant eyes following her every movement. But this time, it wasn't just an inanimate object. The doll felt different. It felt like a presence, alive, aware, watching. Lily moved towards the stairs, her legs trembling with every step, unsure of what she might find. She didn't even know if Sarah was still alive, or if whatever had taken hold of the doll had taken her too. The house was eerily still, its walls heavy with centuries of forgotten secrets, the air thick with anticipation. And then she heard it. A soft scraping sound, like nails on wood, coming from behind her. The attic door creaked open on its own. A gust of cold wind howled through the crack, carrying with it the scent of old paper and damp earth. Lily turned slowly, her heart pounding as she faced the open door. Her eyes narrowed, searching the shadows, her hand instinctively reaching out for the edge of the stairs. The last thing she wanted to do was go back into the attic, but she knew it was the only place left to search. The doll, the thing, had to be stopped. She had to end it. With a steadying breath, Lily took a step toward the attic door. As soon as her foot crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped. The chill was unbearable, seeping into her bones, her lungs heavy with the weight of something unseen. It felt as though she were being pulled into a dream, one that didn't quite make sense, a reality where nothing was what it seemed, and everything had a price. The attic was no longer just an empty room. It was alive, pulsing with dark energy. The shadows in the corner seemed to shift, moving like liquid, while the air shimmered as if reality itself was warping. The doll was no longer sitting peacefully in the corner. It was standing, its small, lifeless feet firmly planted on the floor. Its head twisted, an unnatural crack echoing through the room. Its button eyes glinted in the low light, gleaming with an intelligence that was far too knowing. "You should have listened," the voice whispered, the same voice Lily had heard years ago. It was colder now, more commanding. The voice wasn't just speaking to her, it was inside her head, wrapping around her thoughts, squeezing her chest tight. The doll took a step forward. Lily stumbled back, her hand reaching for anything that could offer her some semblance of protection. Her heart raced as the doll began to move with an unsettling grace, each step measured, deliberate. It wasn't just a cursed object anymore. It was something more, something dark and hungry. "You've awakened what should have stayed buried," the voice continued, now surrounding her. It echoed around the room, reverberating off the walls, filling her mind with images, flashes of things she didn't understand. A woman, old and bent, standing in front of a fire, chanting in a language Lily couldn't comprehend. The doll, her family's heirloom, was part of something bigger. Something far more sinister. Lily's legs shook beneath her, but she didn't dare take her eyes off the doll. She knew it was the only thing holding her to this world. It stopped, its head tilted to one side, as though it were considering her, deciding what to do next. The silence in the room grew oppressive, as though the very air were waiting for her to make the next move. And then it spoke again. "The curse was never meant to be broken. You should have left when you had the chance." Lily's eyes widened in realization. The curse wasn't just tied to the doll, it was tied to the house itself. The very foundation of Millwood had been built on something dark. The doll was the vessel, the anchor, the way the curse had been kept alive for generations. "No," Lily gasped, her voice trembling. "No more." With a final surge of energy, Lily ran towards the doll, her hands outstretched. The moment her fingers touched the fabric of the doll's dress, a burst of light erupted around her. The doll jerked back, its head spinning violently, its body twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. The world around her seemed to unravel, reality itself bending, warping, as if she were falling through time itself. A low growl rumbled from the doll's throat, the voice now sounding like 1,000 whispers, a chorus of voices that had been long silenced. "You should not have touched it. You should not have come back." The light intensified, engulfing everything. Then, with a deafening crack, the light shattered. The house groaned, its foundations shaking violently. The doll let out one final scream, a sound so terrifying it seemed to echo through the very fabric of time itself. Then, there was silence. Lily stood in the middle of the room, breathless, trembling. The attic was empty once more. The doll was gone, vanished as though it had never existed. The house was still, the oppressive air lifting, the temperature returning to normal. But Lily knew better. She had broken the curse, but something deep within her gut told her it was far from over. As she left the attic and descended the stairs, her hand brushed against the family portraits lining the walls, faces staring at her from the past. In their eyes, she saw something else, a warning. The curse wasn't gone. It had only been postponed. And Lily May, having witnessed the dark power of her family's legacy, knew she would never truly escape the curse. It would follow her wherever she went, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. The house, like the doll, was never truly gone. It was only waiting. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.